Welcome to How to Recover Yeast from Bottle Conditioned Beer. I'm calling this a shake and booster. We'll see if that name sticks. This is my oatmeal porter. If you remember, it was jet black. I'm going to recover some English yeast from a porter bottle that I've had for about 2 months in my fridge. This is the medium that I'm going to be throwing the yeast into. That's a sanitized mason jar with some fresh wort. You can see that I've kept quite a bit of the hot break and cold break in this booster sample. According to Bell's Brewery, if you flame the top of an open bottle of beer, you're going to do a pretty good job of sanitizing or sterilizing, probably sanitizing, the area that your yeast in your beer is going to be in contact with. This is preferable to turning the bottle upside down or sideways and getting it into a bath of sanitizing solution. I believe the flame does a pretty good job, and that's how they suggest to do it on the website, so I'm using that example. I'm going to crack this bottle open and decant the beer, aka pour myself a glass. And this is a pretty cool effect. It happened on its own, so I just left it in there. This is me pouring out the contents of the bottle of porter. You can see very shortly that I have a nice glass of beer, and I have the bottle dregs left in the bottle of this beer. I've left a little bit more than I normally would, but that's for the purposes of this video. So give that a swirl, kick that up, check out your beer. Now this is where you want to actually taste the beer that came out of the bottle. Make sure you have no infection. Check the carbonation, check the clarity, check the flavor, the aroma. Give it the good sensory test to make sure that you have a clean batch of beer out of this bottle, and that will tell you pretty much what you need to know about the bottle dregs. Whether or not you've got an infection, something lingering. This bottle, like I said, is probably 10 weeks old at this point. If there were anything in it, it would definitely show itself. Just take the lid off, dump in your bottle dregs. There they are. Bottle dregs in the booster starter solution. Lock that top down and give it a decent shake. Here we go. Ready? Now you're going to do, this is where you're doing your adding a little oxygen to the booster, getting all of that yeast back on board, getting it, waking it up, getting it going. Once you start the shaking process, you can go 90 minutes, 3 hours, 6 hours. It's up to you how long you want to have this booster and all this yeast develop into a culture for yourself. You can see that that's pretty oxygenated. The yeast up in that foam is what's going to make it a worthwhile starter. Now, a key thing is to absolutely evaluate the beer in the glass. Smell it, sniff it, taste it, any off flavors, anything that might be culture related, yeast related, contamination related. You definitely want to ditch this sample. That's just how it is. If you've got different bottles and different bottle conditioning, any single bottle can have a contamination that the rest of the bottles did not. And you want to dump it. So this is the end of my brew day, late at night. This is my oatmeal porter. I decanted it into I got it into my fermenter. And you can see that it's been sitting there with no yeast going. And I am just going to very carefully manage the camera, the airlock, my yeast booster, and I'm going to get it in there. Just kind of balance it out. So, 2 things. 1, make sure your yeast culture is clean. And 2, make sure that your booster solution, your starter solution, is something you want in your beer. Don't use any kind of poorly flavored DME, LME, old wort, anything. That's a sample I made specifically for this earlier in the day. Held it to the side, chilled it down to yeast pitching temps, and that's what I use for my booster. Now you can see the booster's in, the airlock's back on. It's on my basement floor at 64 degrees. Here's a shot of the next morning. Positive airlock is very, very promising, even though there's no activity right now in the batch. That little bit of pressure favoring the inside of the fermenter is huge. Now the next day I made an amber oated beer, which is going to be on the left, and this is my oatmeal porter 24 hours later, or less. This is probably 16 hours later. You can see that it's kicked off, it's up and running, the yeast is going. It's got some pretty good airlock activity. 64 degrees has been pretty consistent on my basement floor. You see that I have it in a pan in case it wants to do a little explosive growth on the yeast. That's unlikely. This is my amber oat beer. This is the sister test batch of this dark test batch. You can see that they're about a day apart in when I pitched yeast into them. The oatmeal porter is off and running. It's got a 24-hour head start on the amber, so it's got some activity. It had a little bit of Croy in there. Temperatures dropped the next day. We're looking at the amber airlock 24 hours later. That's up and running. That's just a US 04 pitch out of a packet. Nothing special with that. Straight in, no rehydration. You can see the fermentation activity on this 24 hours later. It's got some yeast turbulence. It's got yeast particles flowing around. And you can see that the oatmeal porter has gotten some momentum. It's fermenting a little bit faster. It's got a little more airlock activity. It's moving along. A little bit of Kreuzer, not much. Here's an interesting shot. Remember how thick this mash and this wort was as it came through the boil kettle? Remember I used all that steel cut oatmeal in it with a cereal mash? You look at the activity inside of this wort. This wort was about 1040 at yeast pitch, and the oatmeal porter was about 1060 with a heavy dose of oats, and it is just still very, very thick. The yeast is working hard to get through the viscosity of this, and I think it's going to impact the way this goes. So that's it. That's what a shaken booster looks like. We'll see you next time. Subscribe to the channel if you think this is interesting. Peace out.